Lucy Corsetry. I was going to re-upload my previous tutorial on different types of corset boning from my old channel to my new one, but when I looked at it again, the video quality was really not that great, so I just decided to refilm the whole thing. So I'm going to show you in this video all the different types of corset boning and where you can actually use it in your corset, what they're appropriate for. That includes this flat or spring steel boning and also this spiral boning. Also, I'm going to show you different types of plastic boning and even bamboo. So let's get started. Okay, so first of all, what is boning? So here is a collection of different types of bones here. Basically, a bone is a long, stiff, thin object that holds tension and it prevents horizontal wrinkling in your corset. Here's a little strip I have of coutil here, and you'll notice that even in the strongest of fibers, when you put enough tension on the fibers in one direction, for instance here horizontally, the fibers in the other direction, being vertically, they want to shorten, and then you get this horizontal wrinkling here. What the bones do is that they're put in that way so that it holds vertical tension, so it minimizes the wrinkling that you get in your corset. So do bones contribute to the actual shape you have in your corset? Yes and no. For instance, if you had all flat bones in your corset, here's a flat bone, then you would get much softer curves. It would be much smoother because this flat steel has a hard time going around very serious contours. So you would get more of a, say, Victorian hourglass shape in your waist. Whereas if you were to use spiral bones on the sides of your corset like this, you would be able to get a much more dramatic figure. And so flat bones are not suitable for wasp waists, whereas spiral bones are because they're just simply that much more flexible. However, most of the shape of corsets actually come from the cut and pattern of the corset. So here's one of my pattern pieces here, and you'll see that this part, which is the most narrow, this is where the waist is going to be, and down here is the wider part at the hips. So no matter which way you try to put the corset on, it's always going to be smaller here and larger here. As well, this is one of the front side pieces, and you can see the start of giving more room in the bust area here. So bones are not the only contributor to shape, but they do contribute somewhat. And now going on to different types of boning. This is the plastic featherweight boning, and it is inexpensive, but it is not great. It bends out of shape very quickly. It's easily kinked, especially when warmed to body temperature. For instance, you can see how easily I just bend it like that. So if that ever happens when you're wearing the corset, it's going to poke into your ribs or your hips or some area. It's not going to be comfortable. Not recommended for corsets, only perhaps fashion corsets or bustiers. If you really want to use it, then it can be cut and rounded with basically normal scissors. I do not recommend using your fabric shears to cut these. I do not recommend using your fabric shears to cut anything except for fabric, because any other type of things that you try to cut with your fabric shears is just going to dull the blades faster. So here's how I would normally round the tips. I would just cut it to size, going straight across, and then I would just clip off the corners here and then round out the little angles here, and I might pass it over a candle or use some other source of heat to just make the end very, very smooth. Just a note on rounding all of your boning tips, this is a must. No matter what kinds of bones you use, you should always round down or in some way cover the tips of the boning, or else the sharp ends of the bones will start to rub through the fabric of your corset and you will eventually end up with a hole in your corset. The next step up from featherweight boning is probably these heavy-duty cable ties here. Some people who make corsets absolutely swear by these because they're readily accessible at places like Home Depot, and they're also much thicker and heavier than the featherweight boning. You can see it's about 3/8 of an inch wide. As you get down to the other end, it's more about 1/2 inch wide there. So they don't kink out of shape quite as easily, although they will warp eventually. However, if these bones warp, then they're very easily replaced. So once again, you can just use normal kitchen scissors or craft scissors to cut off the ends and then round them out, and then you can pass it over a candle or some other heat source to really smooth out the end there. One thing that I must say though is do be careful not to burn yourself or anything else when using heat, and also do this in a ventilated area if you are using the cable ties or the featherweight boning, because some types of plastic give off toxic fumes when heated. what I have here is actually a strip of bamboo. I've put down a white shirt so you can see it over the wood. So other forms of structural support are reeds or bamboo. You may have to put more than one strip in the same boning channel of either the reed or the bamboo to give you enough of the structural support that you need. However, one really cool thing about this is that, you know, it's very ecologically friendly. If you dampen this before you actually put it into the corset, then it will basically mold itself to the shape of the corset. If you were to tip this, what I would probably recommend is to tape it or dip it in a similar way that you would for flat steel boning. And one thing that you must be careful of is not putting this in extremely wasp-waisted corsets, because even though it is very flexible, it will still snap if you put too much tension on it. I don't have that much experience with working with reed or bamboo, but I plan to experiment with it in the next few months. However, if you want your corset to last a lifetime, then I would definitely recommend using steel boning. So steel boning comes in two flavors: spring steel, also called flat steel, or spiral steel. So spiral steel boning, also called spiral wire, looks like a flattened slinky, and it can bend back and forth like this, and it can also bend side to side. So if you have boning channels that are bendy or not perfectly straight, then you should use spiral bones in those areas. Spiral bones can be used on the sides of the corset, but I would not recommend using it for the front or back because you need the extra rigidity of the flat steel boning. To be able to cut spiral steel boning, you will need wire cutters like this, as normal scissors will simply not cut through this metal. Also, to round out the tips and protect the sharp tips from going through the corset, you will need these little U-tips right here that you can buy separately. Spring steel boning, also called flat steel boning, also called white boning, because as you can see it's white here. It can bend back and forth, as you can see here, but it cannot bend from side to side. I'm trying to put some force on it, but it's simply not. So this type of boning is only appropriate to use in very straight boning channels. I always use spring steel boning in the very front of the corset by the busk, or even replacing the busk, and also in the back sandwiching the grommets, because you need that extra rigidity in the front to keep your stomach flat, and also in the back it prevents the grommets from ripping out. It provides some structural support there. You can completely bone a corset in flat steel boning if you like. However, some people prefer to use a combination of flat and spiral steel boning on the sides of the corset to get the desired shape and comfort. Spring steel boning might look similar to the white plastic featherweight boning, however they are very different things. This one, it does not respond or change to body heat. It's also much more rigid and much more difficult to kink, as you can see here. To cut it, you will need some of these heavy-duty cutters right here that you can get at Home Depot, or you can borrow it from somebody who has a toolkit. You will not be able to cut this using normal scissors or even the little wire cutters that I had shown you before, because it is too rigid to be able to cut through with normal scissors, and also this is not even wide enough. It doesn't have like a wide enough mouth in it to be able to cut all the way through the width of it. This boning is white because it has a white nylon coating over the metal. What this does is it prevents the metal from corroding or rusting in any way, because the nylon is airproof and waterproof. And also, if anybody has an allergy to boning, then this will protect their skin. Obviously, the bones are not going to be right next to your skin, but this is a good safety precaution. Now, another version of this spring steel boning is this wire drain cleaner right here. As you can see, I got it at the dollar store for $1.49 here. So it is a lot less expensive and more readily available. However, you will have to go to the extra effort of cleaning off the oil that comes on it and wrapping or coating this in some way to make it waterproof and airproof to prevent it from corroding over a while. After you cut this bone, you're going to need to grind down the ends of it, grind down the sharp corners using a metal file or a bench grinder, and I will show you how to do that in a separate video. And then you're going to need to tip or some way cover or protect the ends of it, not only to protect the fabric of your corset from the end of the bone poking through, but also to protect the metal, because once you cut this, there's going to be exposed metal where the nylon is no longer coating it. So what some people do is use the same types of U-tips that they use for the spiral steel boning. I generally don't do that for my spring steel. What I do instead is I use Teflon tape, like you can see here. So it just comes in this little roll. They're like 25 cents each, very, very inexpensive. and I put this over, and what this does is, because it's plumber's tape, it will provide a waterproof, airproof coating around the end of the boning, and also if you put enough layers on it, then it makes the end of it soft, so it's not going to poke through the corset very easily. What some other people use is this plastic dip here. It's originally meant to dip tools in, but what you do is you basically just open it up, you know, take off the duct tape and dip it in, let it dry for a few hours or overnight, and then it's ready to go. And so if I'm not in a hurry, then I'll generally use this because it has less of a risk of rubbing off. That's all for this video. I hope you found it informative. If you liked it, then please let me know. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments down below. I will see you in the next video. Bye.